last Sunday before Halloween or Samhain, I thought I would briefly mention witches and how the fear of the unknown leads to persecution. I started poking around that history, and I found the lessons from those dark days are way more relevant than I dared imagine. For one thing, they were our people involved. First Church of Salem, Massachusetts, founded by Puritans on August 6, 1629, today goes by the name First Church Salem, Unitarian Universalist. The church, the minister, and many of the accused and accusers of the Salem witch trials were quite literally our people. That congregation was founded before Unitarianism was a thing in America. But as soon as Unitarianism was commonly used as a label for congregations or leaders, they were wearing that label. The church in Salem was one of ours. First Church of Salem Unitarian Universalist is one of the oldest Protestant churches founded in North America. It was the first to be governed by congregational polity. That's to say, democratically governed by its members, electing their leaders, managing their own finances, and choosing their minister. Just like us. They are our people. I mentioned the church was founded in 1629. The Reverend John Higginson became the minister in 1660. He served for 48 years until 1780. The infamous witch trials occurred in 1692 during his ministry. During Higginson's tenure, Salem and the wider Massachusetts colony experienced massive growth and change and fear and violence. By 1670, the tensions between rural Salem village, which is now Danvers, a whole different town, and the prosperous Salem town itself flared. Contentions multiplied when Salem village formed its own little church and appointed a controversial minister over there. It's there in the new neighboring church where the witch hysteria began. In 1692, a few teenage girls reported seeing visions and accused several members of the Salem village congregation of witchcraft. One of the girls was the 9-year-old daughter of the parish minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. Hysteria spread throughout the county that resulted in 138 people being arrested and imprisoned. 20 people were tried for witchcraft and executed. Members of First Salem Church caught up in the hysteria included Rebecca Nurse and Giles Corey. They were full members of the church until they were excommunicated and sent to their deaths. In 1992, however, at the 300-year anniversary of the trials, their memberships were formally reinstated. And a memorial was erected in downtown Salem to remember the 20 other people who were executed as witches. Perhaps the most well-known participant in the Salem witch trials was the Reverend Nicholas Noyes, the junior minister at the First Church Salem. He fanned the flames of religious hysteria as a vocal persecutor and accuser during those trials. Unlike his colleagues, he never expressed remorse for his involvement. It's said that he died of a curse because his death, asphyxiating on his own blood, resembled the storied words of one of the witches before her execution. She said, "God will give you blood to drink." Happy Halloween, y'all. So at one level, this very dark moment in history is relevant because it's quite literally our Unitarian heritage. It's also relevant because the atmosphere of fear, it was deep existential fear, is reminiscent of what is shaping American culture right now. Salem was rapidly growing with a successful shipping industry. Shipping is great news for those guys who own the ships, but ships also bring in all sorts of goods and salty sailor people from all over the world. The exploitation of sailors in shipping is known to be some of the worst worker exploitation in history. It's a business that people are naturally very wary of, but the local economy was booming on the back of shipping. In the midst of that growth was the spinoff of the splinter church that I mentioned in Salem Village. The people of Salem today are quick to point out that the hysteria actually started over there in Salem Village in that breakaway church. In those days, there were also fears related to recurring waves of the smallpox epidemic. Anyone you came across might be carrying a highly contagious, terrible disease. There was no way of knowing who to trust, so it's best not to trust anyone. Does that sound familiar? Massachusetts experienced several smallpox outbreaks in the 17th and 18th centuries. Another source of anxiety was from an influx of French immigrants, strangely enough. Refugees from the beginning of the French and Indian Wars, people fleeing from the Montreal area without a source of income or a place to call home, trying to settle in Massachusetts. Perhaps the greatest fear came from the real threat of Native American attacks. Colonial forces decimated American Indians over the course of centuries, but that process was long and incredibly violent. The people of Salem were very vulnerable to retribution, and they were terrified. No one felt safe. They all needed someone to blame for the very reasonable fear they were experiencing. And so began a very dangerous time. I remember reading The Scarlet Letter in middle school. I hadn't looked at the details of the story since then. What I learned about this week wasn't just that they were our people. I also learned about the complicated circumstances that led to such great anxiety and desire to blame and finger point. It was fear. In some cases, it was self-preservation. But it's helpful to be specific. It was fear of people who were perceived as dangerous. It was fear of people who were different. Fear of women, fear of American Indians, fear of European immigrants, fear of disease, fear of people who had more money, or fear of people who had less money. Those people, those scary people who are out to get us. It only takes a few layers of difference and fear to start transforming another human being into a monster. Listening deeply, seeking to understand the other, isn't just for their sake. Listening deeply to those who are different can also help reduce our own anxieties about the unknown. Whether it's in our own home or national political stage, it's a lot more useful to listen what someone is telling us than to speculate about their motivations. If you've been at Tapestry or any UU congregation for a while, you know that as a faith tradition, we've identified a set of core values as guideposts. We look to love, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. Now, some people have been a little bit confused. We used to have 8 principles. Now we have 7 values. What's all of that about? A lot of the language from the principles has been carried over directly into the values. The list is pretty straightforward, but one thing we haven't talked much about is what exactly is a value. A value is slightly different from a principle or a belief. Beliefs are ideas and opinions that we hold to be true. We like to think that we have evidence or proof for them, but they're things that can be true or false. Values, on the other hand, are based on what is important to us. Values are how we attribute worth to the things in our world. They aren't so much true or false. Values are more a way of identifying our priorities. There are a lot of different values to choose from. Most of them are okay, but in the real world, different values start to compete with one another for our time and our resources and our attention. So we choose, what will we focus on? We choose what will be our guideposts in decision-making and living. We humans aren't quite as illogical as we like to think. Our behavior isn't always driven by reason and statistics. More often, we are driven by our emotions, and our reason comes in behind that to follow and to justify what we find to be true. It's not all bad, though, that emotional drive and intuition has, through culture, developed into some values that we tend to share as cultural groups. Depending on our cultural and our personal experience, we're more or less attuned to particular values. Maybe it's a sense of individual freedom that seems most important, or the sanctity of the family that seems most important. Maybe we commit to doing what seems the most compassionate. Those moral commitments are deeply ingrained, and they shape a lot of how we understand right and wrong and politics. There are lots of competing values in our lives. When we list our values as Unitarian Universalists, we acknowledge that there are many important things in life. For us, as people of faith, these 7 values are the things that we lift up. Others lift up independence, or loyalty, or reverence, or competency, or happiness, or peace, reputation, thrift, and the list goes on and on. They can quickly come into competition with others. So we choose the ones that are important to us as a faith community. They are generosity, interdependence, pluralism, transformation, equity, justice, and always keeping love at the center. Today's reading that John brought talked about different ways of experiencing Spanish language as a young American. It celebrates the opportunity of experiencing the world through 2 different complementary languages. Some of us have had a glimpse into that experience. Some of you, I think, are fluent in multiple languages. Even just being proficient in a second language gives a window into how a second language provides a different lens to understand our world. A different vocabulary brings new specificity to different particular emotions or particular details of the environment. A second language offers a whole new lens for experiencing the world, and every once in a while, if we listen closely to people whose experience is different from our own, we can also see the world through another person's values. Perhaps the value of loyalty or self-sufficiency. Both are great assets. They just aren't our primary values. There are far more opportunities than most of us acknowledge to listen across difference. Last week we heard from a few tapestry families who navigate significant cultural difference in their own family around their kitchen table. I still need to go back and listen to that sermon. Perhaps it's in your home too. It's certainly within your neighborhood. I know that you do not live surrounded by Unitarian Universalists in your neighborhood who share your cultural background and values. If you're in a heterosexual relationship, you navigate gender differences every day. It's an opportunity to learn from your partner about how they experience the world in a way that's different from yours. There's difference here at Tapestry, difference within your extended family. You'll have plenty of opportunity to practice listening at Thanksgiving. Don't worry. We can disagree without turning our adversaries into monsters. In fact, we are better prepared to disagree, better prepared to fight back when we are armed with actual facts, not assumptions. I grew up watching some cartoons. I realized on the way here how odd this particular one is. It was, I'll say, a pothead, a bookish lesbian, a couple of very preppy people driving around in a van with a giant talking dog. If you haven't figured it out, I'm talking about Scooby-Doo. I imagine it may have been on in the background of some of your households. You may not have listened to the plot line of that glorious 30 minutes. In every single episode, this band of young detectives would solve a mystery. Often the mystery was a haunting or a monster or some other very spooky, dangerous thing that kept people away and afraid. And at the end of every episode, they found that it was always a person behind the spooky mystery. Whether it was a haunted house or disappearing goods from a factory, or it was always a person behind it. They were usually driven by financial greed or wanting to keep the property of their family or some other self-centered motivation. But at the end, it was never a monster. It was a real-life human being. So I'm going to say some unpopular stuff now. Half of the United States, that other half, is not immensely stupid. There are plenty of very smart and very unintelligent people in all political parties. Half of the United States is not morally deficient or completely lacking in compassion. And those people are not sheep. There are plenty of people who appreciate being told what to think and how to vote on both sides of the culture wars. We just voted, and most of us referred to a voting guide of some sort or another from a source that we trust. We come to this election season with different information. And I am not slipping into complete moral relativism. I'm not saying good guys on both sides and all of that. Facts matter. Science matters. The people we disagree with are taking information from sources they trust. A lot of that information is wrong and misleading. But the people we disagree with are taking information from sources they trust. Now, we will stand firm for our rights and protect our loved ones, no matter what happens. And we will be more successful when we seek to truly understand the people on the other side of the divide. They are not monsters. They are human beings. And I will acknowledge the sad truth is human beings, everyday people, are capable of doing terrible things. Just look at our own ancestors in Salem. We cannot fight fear with fear. We cannot fight hate with hate. Our faith calls us to lead with love. That is a really hard thing to do sometimes. But leading with love is really the whole point. Amen.